Dando sequência ao MOVE 2012, iniciaremos agora a sessão paralela 1, chamando ao palco o moderador Marvin Radford, da International Sports and Culture Association, Estados Unidos, e os palestrantes.
And the speakers, Tom Pitchon, Laureus Sport for Good Foundation from England, Janela Priperin from the National Secretariat of Sports and Leisure, Vladimir Borkovic from Football World and from Serbia, and Nascimento from Unilever Brazil. We now pass the floor to Marvin Radford.
Thank you. Bom dia, good morning, and welcome to Parallel Session 1. I would just give a couple of comments about who we are and why we are here in this session. Not so long ago, it was good enough to say sport is good, sport is powerful. And then we can elaborate in a number of ways about the power of sport. Today, we know that it's not good enough. It's not good enough for the policymakers. It's not good enough for the organizations who are implementing the projects on the ground. And it's not good enough for the donors, the public sector as well as the private sector. What we know now is that we have to have a core set of values. And for the partnerships that are necessary to achieve our work, these values need to match. That is why today we have invited these 4 presenters to join us. And you can think of them in a couple of categories. On the one hand, you have donors. On the other hand, you have grantees, or those receiving contributions. On the other hand, you have the agents of policy or policymakers. And sort of parallel to that, you have the agents of actions or activities being delivered. So we hope that this combination can be interesting, and we hope by the end of the session you can take away some good examples of shared values. Why do they work with those that they work with? What do they have in common? And what are they looking for going forward? Having said that, we would like to begin. Our first presenter is Tom Pitchon from the Laureus Sport for Good Foundation. And I will just say from the beginning, you have the opportunity to ask questions, but we will take the questions, we will table the questions after all 4 of the presenters have concluded. So with that, I would like to give the floor to Tom Pitchon.
Start again. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Some of you may have noticed I'm not a professional sportsman, but for the last 7 odd years, I've been working on projects all over the world that use sport as a social tool with young people. I've worked both on the implementation side, running projects in the UK and Africa, and also more recently as a funder of global networks of projects working all over the world, using sport as a tool to tackle different social problems. So I'm here today really to talk about the values that are shared by different stakeholders working in this space that we'll call Sport for Good. And I just want to run you through briefly the structure of what I'm going to say today. I'm going to try and keep it brief. I know you've had a lot of presentations and a lot of PowerPoints, so I'm going to try and make this as painless as possible for all of you. But to start off, the structure, just briefly, I'm going to say a few words about Laureus, about who we are, what we do, a few words about the shared values and beliefs that I've encountered working in this space, things that unite us and the projects that we work with around the world. And then I'm going to zoom in on those values, because I think it's important that if we're talking about values, we understand how do they translate into practical action on the ground that makes a real impact for people and for communities. And then at the end, I'm just going to speak briefly about some future trends that I see emerging in this area of work. So just to start off, sorry, there's a slide missing here. So about Laureus, can I move this mic? Am I allowed to walk around? Does it move? Maybe not, okay.
You can take this one if you want.
Yeah, that's better. So basically what we do at Laureus is we fund and we promote the use of sport as a tool to change the lives of young people around the world. And the strategy, how we do it, is very simple. The first thing, it's all about social impact. So we work with projects that are working with young people, and we fund them and we support them. So at the moment we have over 100 projects in 34 countries around the world that are using sport to change the lives of young people. They all do very, very different things, but what they have in common is that they all use sport as part of a solution to a social problem. So for example, we have one project that's working with Palestinians and Israelis in the Middle East. They use basketball to bring them together. We have a project in South Africa that's using, in a village, that uses skateboarding with young people. We have projects tackling landmines in Cambodia using football. And we have projects right here in Brazil. Yesterday, I was in the favela of Maré in Rio, visiting a project we support there, an amazing project called Lucha pela Paz, that's been in the favela for 10 years, using boxing and martial arts, working with people who are in gangs and offering them a route out of the gang into something different, pathways into employment, into education. So this is our global network. Sorry, I don't know what's this PowerPoint jumps back and forth. What we do is more than just fund the projects, we support them. So we give them training and tools to help them increase their impact. And we also try and create a network of organizations that can come together to share learning. Now, the other thing we do, once we've created the impact, we try to get as much evidence as we possibly can about how exactly the lives of young people have been changed. And then we use that evidence, we work with universities, with researchers, we create reports, and we use it to try and convince other organizations to invest in this kind of work, whether it's other governments, businesses, other funders. And it's as Marvin was saying just now, if we really want to get more investment in, we need much more than just pretty pictures. We need evidence, we need data. So there's a big push from our side now to try and get that evidence and data around how sport works exactly. So, moving into the real topic of this, the shared values that unite different organizations that are working in this area. There are very many, I can't speak for the sector, and these are just a few that I've encountered in my career working in the space. One, I think, is obvious, the value of sport for good, the belief that sport is much more than a game, that sport is a force that can be used to tackle social problems. Social innovation, I think that's quite specific to this area of sport for good. A lot of people see sport as a way to do things differently, a way of mixing things up, a way of doing something that is exciting and innovative and new. The need to evidence the impact of sport. I think initially maybe this was seen as something driven more by funders. I think now more and more this is across the board with organizations working. People really do buy into this and believe that we need evidence to show exactly how sport can change the lives of young people. Responding to local needs. I think a lot of the organizations we support around the world, they use sport as a hook or a magnet to get people involved, particularly for youth. It's really powerful. So often I think sport is seen as a way of responding to what people actually want and need. I'm going to get into this with a case study a little bit in a second. The other one, the final one, is the power of collaboration and knowledge sharing. This isn't specific at all to Sport for Good, but I think it's particularly important for this area because often it's seen as a very young sector. It's a sector that's still growing. So we still need to identify what works, what doesn't work, where are the really exciting and innovative methodologies and approaches that are being used around the world, and how do we create opportunities for those to be shared with other organizations in other countries. So that's why I think forums like this are so valuable actually. Now what I want to do is just zoom in a little bit to each one to see how does it translate in actual action. So the first one, the power of sport for good, is said a lot more articulately than me by our patron Nelson Mandela, who spoke at the inauguration of the Laureus movement back in 2000, who basically explained his vision of sport as he saw it, as a tool that has the power to change the world. Now, I just thought, Laureus uses this quote from Mandela a lot. We use it in PowerPoints, we use it in speeches, we go around and we say, our patron Nelson Mandela says sport has the power to change the world. But I think it's important to use this opportunity to see, well, like how exactly, let's go a bit underneath it and see what are the things inside sport that give it that power. What I would call the sport effect. I think you could see it as a few basic key ingredients that's specific to sport that give it this social power. One is basically the life skills and values. Almost all sporting codes have these values that come out when you use them. The values of teamwork, discipline, respect, following the rules, communication. So that's one thing that you learn on the pitch, or in the ring, which is completely transferable to life. The other thing is the magnetic power of sport. Sport, it's got the power to inspire, to create passion, it's got mass appeal, it gets people excited, it gets people engaged, and it's used as a magnet to attract people. The other thing is unity. So when you walk onto a pitch or into a ring, it doesn't matter if you're a banker or a poet, Brazilian, British, black, white, rich, poor, you're a player and you're all equal. And I think this is very powerful. This is used by many projects around the world in peace building, in breaking down gender barriers, and we see it used to really, really strong effect. And the final thing is the physical and mental health. You play sport, it makes you feel physically good, mentally well. So when you put these four things together, you get this effect, the sport effect, which I think is something that you can kind of drop in. Forgive the kind of slightly not very cool graphics here, but I think you get the point. It's something you can drop into an existing social initiative. You bring sport into it and it gives this effect that you can use to beef up the impact. So what we're not saying is that sport is a magic tool. I don't think you walk into a favela or a township or a slum with a football or a basketball and you magically see that unemployment falls, people hug each other, gangs drop. It doesn't work like that. But if you're smart about it and you integrate sport effectively with existing social services, it can be an amazingly powerful tool. And this is what we see with projects that we support all over the world. So to just give an example of one organization and how this comes into this second value of innovation, this is a township called Kailicha in Cape Town, South Africa. And what they've done here is they've built an AstroTurf football pitch in the middle of the township. Now, this area is one of the most high crime zones in the township of Kailicha. So it's a very strategic place to put it. They have, you can see, lights all around the pitch, which light the pitch up in the evening. So what we've seen is that the crime that was happening in this road around the pitch has dropped very significantly because the whole area is lit up. But more importantly, what we see is that on this pitch, there's a lot more than just sport happening. There's a whole range of other initiatives that are going on: training, vocational training, life skills, team building, health education, coaching and leadership pathways, signposting to other social services. So it's a real hub, and the sport is mixed with a whole range of different things that are happening. And I think this is the model that works very well and is very, very replicable across different townships, favelas, communities, right across the world. And I think this is the model that when you see, you can actually start to get genuine reductions in crime, unemployment, and see some really serious impact, really serious measured impact. The third thing, wow, this thing's not really happening. The third value is around evidencing the social impact. So I'll just speak about it from the Laureus perspective, why we think it's important. At the moment, Laureus funds over 100 projects in 34 countries around the world. And if you ask me, how many kids does that impact? I can tell you it's about 500,000. But if you say to me, and how did their lives change? What happened to those kids? How many of those kids quit drugs or went into education or got employment or made new friends or widened their social networks? I can't tell you that data. We don't have it at the moment, and we really need it because the impact is there. The life change is happening every day. Why can't we collect the data? The main barrier there is that the projects we support around the world, very often they don't have the systems in place to be able to measure this stuff. It's not that easy to do this kind of stuff. So what we've been doing the last 3 years, we built a partnership actually with Streetfootballworld, with the organisation Vladimir represents, and with another organisation called Acumen, run by a gentleman in the audience here, Damien Hatton. We created a package of support which is to help the projects measure their social impact. And basically the reasons that we're doing this is I'll forget the PowerPoint actually. It's all about developing a better understanding of how sport impacts young people. It's about building the capacities of our projects around the world, and it's about being able to move beyond the pretty pictures and the quotes and actually showing data and evidence that's going to get other organizations to come and invest in this kind of work. So just moving on to the final thing, the fourth value about responding to local needs. I wanted to give an example, an organization I used to work at a few years ago called Coaching for Hope that I worked in for about 4 years. Just as an example of how they use sport to respond to a need. So it was in Burkina Faso, one of the poorest countries in West Africa, and this charity had been in there for about 20 years running HIV awareness programs with kids from orphanages and street kids centres. And they were really struggling to get kids engaged in the program. Many of those workshops and classes, they were half empty. We couldn't get the kids to come. They just weren't that interested in sitting in an HIV workshop. So they did a big meeting. They brought street children in from across West Africa, and they asked them, what do you want? And these kids had said one of the main things they wanted was football. They weren't actually that interested in sitting in a classroom. They wanted sport, they wanted fun. So we responded by building a program that was training football coaches to deliver HIV education to the young people in a football context on the pitch, bringing messages in through different games. And we saw a number of things happen very quickly. The first thing was that the number of kids in the program increased dramatically. We went from a situation where we couldn't get anyone to come to a situation where we had too many young people. We had to start turning young people away. We also saw the funding for the project increase very quickly. It allowed us to approach new types of funders, Adidas, FIFA, the FA, who came in to support. This allowed us to measure the impact, improve the methodology, and we were then able to spread the project around Africa, into Latin America, across Europe. So just by listening to what people wanted and giving it to them, we found that by meeting this demand, the project just grew naturally. It grew wings and it spread right around the world. So I think it's an interesting example of how sport can be used to respond to what people really want. The final thing, the power of collaboration and knowledge sharing. Why is it important? I mean, broadly speaking, we can do much more working together than working alone. And one of the things we're trying to do at Laureus is to reduce the isolation of projects and give them opportunities to build partnerships, collaboration, and share knowledge with other organizations. And the other is that a lot of the projects we support, all of them actually, are tackling really, really difficult social issues: gang crime, violence, discrimination, poverty, unemployment. And they're complex issues. So you need many organizations, many brains thinking about these things together and sharing ideas to actually do it well. So this is why we think knowledge sharing is so important. The Laureus network of projects we support is one of many different networks around the world that is working in this space to build this knowledge sharing. What we do specifically, we've got a range of things. Youth exchanges. We had last year a group of young people from Rio flying into South Africa to share learning with other young people. We have a global summit that we organise that unites all of our projects around the world to share knowledge with each other, training, project twinnings. There's quite a lot underway here. And a package of training courses we've developed globally, that projects that allow organisations to share knowledge. So training in how to prevent crime through sport, how to build peace through sport, how to measure the social impact of sport. So it's a whole area that we've been working on, and I'm flagging it in case people are interested, they want to know more. We could always get in touch through ISCA. I'm more than happy to give more information about this. This is just a quote which I thought was interesting that sums up why I think knowledge is a really important thing to share. To sum up then, future trends, where the sector is moving, I think really M&E is often going to be seen less and less as a burden and more as a kind of a value, a thing that people need to integrate into their organisations to show the real impact of their work. I think there's going to be more sharing of knowledge across sectors, so that might be within Sport for Good and wider international development, and also between the business and social sectors. I think there's going to be more of this kind of sharing of knowledge more broadly. I think the funders of this kind of work are going to need to be a lot more coordinated. They're going to need to look at ways where they can share measurement systems, fund things together. I think it will produce efficiencies in terms of impact and also reduce burden in terms of reporting of the different projects we support. More and more knowledge and expertise. Organisations who are working in this space are getting better and better, and we're seeing more and more methodologies, approaches, cutting-edge ways of doing things that are emerging. And I think that this is going to be basically something that increases over time. As that happens, you're going to have more funding, more awareness building around the value of this work. I think the sector is really growing. And as that happens, I think projects are going to need really to look at how they beef up their procedures, their reporting, their management systems to absorb this kind of funding, because especially the most successful projects, sometimes they grow very quickly, and there are real challenges there in terms of how they manage that growth. I think, finally, in terms of social legacy, we've got the World Cup here in 2014, the Olympics in 2016. The calls for the legacy, they're louder, they're going to get more articulate. It's going to need to be about much more than just participation and how many people are playing sport, but looking around really how the lives of those people who are playing sport are being changed. And then finally, this maybe isn't a trend, this is maybe more of a hope, but I think governments in particular need to think of sport as a very broad thing. At the moment, for example, in the UK, each ministry has its own policy. Ministry of Education has their sport policy, the Health Ministry has a sport policy, the Education, they all have their own little policy, and it's not joined up. So I think you need people to look at it at a much higher level. What can sport do for Britain, or for Brazil, or for whichever country you're in, and have a coordinated strategy to sport that brings different government ministries together. At the moment, it's not really joined up. So this is broadly where it's going. I'll leave it there. And thanks very much for your time. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Our next speaker is Gianna Perim. I had the pleasure of meeting her a few weeks ago. We were both joining a meeting in New York for the Design to Move program, which you're going to hear more about in the coming days. She's representing the Ministry of Sport here in Brazil, and I would just give the floor to her.
Good afternoon. First, I'd like to thank the invite made by the SESC and thank the moderator. Not only to thank for the opportunity to be here and speak in the name of the Ministry of Sport, but even more than that, to be part of this movement that's so important to us, that wants to democratize the access to sports and physical education. Like our speaker said, it's very important, since we are at the decade of sports with big events, that we talk about the social legacy so much. We understand that this is a big opportunity to discuss this collective action, integrating different players so that we can mobilize society as a whole for this big objective. I would like also to apologize in the name of the Secretary of State from the Ministry of State that he was not able to come, so I'm here representing him, represent Secretary Afonso Barbosa. So, to start our presentation, we are here to talk about the values of sports, but our proposal would be initially to show you the policies that the Ministry of Sports has developed. And to do this, we need to do an introduction of our structure that recently was totally revamped. So we're going to start showing a little bit how we're organized. Here we have our organogram. So you can understand, those of you who work in this field know that the Law Pelé was recently updated. It still has the three main lines, is the educational sports, participation, and high-performance sports. And recently, last year, there was a decree that created the internal change so that we could deal with the new challenges of the organization of mega events. So now we have three. We have the high performance agency, which takes care of this part. This was recently. Now we have the agency for soccer and to defend the rights of the consumer, to help in the organization of the World Cup. And recently we created a new agency, which is the one I represent, which is the National Secretary of Sports and Leisure, which is a division from the other ones, from the other agencies. So these two were put together, and now the sports of participation and the educational sports are under this structure. And it is of this agency that we're going to talk about, because that's the one that has more to do with the event. To put this into a context, it's also important to explain that recently, at the end of last year, we had a discussion of the new pluriannual plan. As you know, the budget for the ministries, for the federal agencies, they're based on a 4-year budget plan. So it lasts 4 years, but it initiates always at the second year of every term. So last year it closed, and now in 2012 we have a new 4-year plan, which was built last year. And there was an effort from the planning ministry to reorganize these actions so that the agencies could really think about the objectives of our policies to better be able to answer to the needs of society. So when it comes to sports, due to the big events, the sports secretary had two main objectives. The first is the right to sports, which is exactly what we're doing. And the objective is to expand and qualify the access of the population to the sports and leisure through intersectoral articulations, promoting citizenship and quality of life. And the other big event is where the other agencies work, because it's connected to the mega events, to take Brazil to a condition where there's a sports powerful player preparing athletes from the base until excellence with technology, education, better administration, better structure, comfort for the shows, and having a better economy. So the high performance is related to the mega event, and the right to sport and leisure is focused on the first event. And so we can handle all these objectives, we have the structure of our agency. The Secretary of Sports and Leisure that takes care of this, it has different programs of the ministry, and therefore it has different coordinations that takes care of the policies of different, so we can articulate things with other ministries and secretaries. When it comes to physical education, we work with the health department. We also have the coordination specific for our role with education, focused here with sports and leisure. Here we have organization of Indian sports, and here we have general coordination for games and events, competition events, because also we also responsible for the championships that are not of high performance, which are organized by the Educational Confederation and the University Sports Confederation. Moving on. So we can organize these different actions and develop our programs. The 4-year plan is based on the budget plans. Why is this important? Because the federal organ can't always answer all the demands. There's so many requests and projects, but the budget limits and sometimes of the actions themselves hinder us from being able to develop the way we'd like to. So one of the limitations that we have today is to organize things according to our budget, but we have other things that are open in different perspectives. The organization of this first action, developing activities and support to educational sports and leisure, was a big change in our structure. Some of you might know some of our programs like Segundo Tempo, Sport Lazer da Cidade, before they were budget programs. Now, with this new organization, they are all part of this action, which allows us also to support other models of sports and leisure and stuff like that that might not be exactly part of the one the ministry is using today. So today we have more room to be able to encourage new projects and innovation. We also support competitions and events. We also have to develop sport as a social legal. This responsibility is under our secretary, but we have a very small budget for this. I'm going to explain this later. Encouraging research and social inclusion. This is to substitute the initial proposal that we had from SEGES, that some of you were part of the SEGES group for the development of research for leisure and sport. We can no longer do this in 2012, so now we're going to have a new bid for this new budget so that we can somehow foment research in leisure, in sport and leisure and social inclusion. Also, we have working together with the Department of Justice and also for Indian championships and sports material. Okay, talking a little bit about our programs and actions. First, the sports and leisure of the city. I think it's a little bit too small to read. Could we zoom into the objectives, please? To encourage sports and leisure to all ages, and also to those who have special needs. To encourage communities, also favor research and knowledge, and contribute so that sports and leisure can be public policies and the right of all. We have the proposal to use the public spaces that already exist, different arenas, different city squares, and also offer sports activity and leisure activities, and also have cultural and artistic workshops to the population. So it's organized through partnership with the city government and state governments. But in 2012, we want to bring this program to the city level because we believe this is the way to expand and take this access to the population. Over the past years, which it has now completed 10 years, during this period we had 681 partnerships. So it's organized in nucleus of sports and leisure. We have 3,207 with 1,266 people benefited. More than 10 million people were benefited from this program, with more than 19,000 jobs. And over this time, more than 27,000 people were trained. So one of our objectives is to train people and the social agents of sports and leisure. We believe that's one of the ways to foment the development of the policy. In 2012, we issued a bid. Now we can advance in creating more nucleuses, which are centers, which are for all ages. We have 45 new agreements, and another possibility is to offer the development of sports and leisure in traditional community, like Indian, rural or river communities, which have specific needs and different needs, and we understand that they need to be treated special and different. So at this moment, we chose 2 partnerships, but we'd like to expand this proposal. So in relation to SEGES, in 2012, we were not able to continue with the agreements of 2011, but starting 2013, we're going to have some new bids so we can invest in research and knowledge to help foment sports and leisure. PELC, we have the same objective of sports and leisure, but the healthy life is specifically for adults above 45 and older people above 65. Also giving them physical and leisure activities with having this specific target audience in mind. So in 2012, we have 25 cities participating in this project. For both of these projects, these are the two that are most adequate to the MOVE proposal starting 2012. There's a little booklet that you got in commemoration to the 10 years where you have all the details of these programs. Here we have our goals for PELC, how the centers are organized. So we have the PELC Center and the Vida Saudável. PELC services about 4,000 people with their activities, and the Healthy Life about 2,000 life, just for you to see more or less the reach. Now, if we're talking about 25 cities, we have about 12,000 people in each city, 2,000 people in each city. The program called Segundo Tempo, or Second Time, it's organized through offering sports activities for children, teens, and young people from 6 to 17 on the schedule that they're not having school. This is twice a week. The idea is that we can occupy all the time that they have left, because in our country we don't have full-time schooling, so that when they're not having school they can be doing sports. Unfortunately, we cannot occupy all their time due to our budget limits, but we have a proposal to have some partnerships to integrate the Segundo Tempo to the educational program, so it can be part of the pedagogical proposal the school has. So part of the curriculum will be a sports proposal to go with their education. The methodology, as well as PEC, is to use public spaces that already exist, and private spaces through partnerships for sports activities for teens and young people, for children and young people, with pedagogical basis for sports. It's not we don't want to open schools of different sports, but through offering different kinds of sports in an inclusive way, so that all children and young people have access to sports. Here we have a demonstration of the map in Brazil of how these partnerships were distributed. You can see that there's a higher concentration in the south and southeast, but the centers of each one of these partnerships, they're also more diluted to the northeast. When we have the Mais Educação program, which we have we're in 6,000 schools with about 500 million participants. Here, our reach is all over the country, have the Mais Educação. And here you see we have a much higher reach. The program today altogether is 1.8 million participants a year. But that's very below our potential. We have this age range from 6 to 17. In the last census, we have about 45 million young people. In the Segundo Tempo, we're only reaching 4%, so we're far from making it effective public policy, and that's our big challenge. We also have the program Painting Freedom and Painting Citizenship. Both, especially Painting Freedom, is with the Justice Department. The proposal is the re-socialization of people who come from prison and helping them to start working in manufacturing sports goods. Every 3 days worked, their penalty is diminished by 1 day. In the citizenship, we also have the same proposal of producing sports material for poorer communities. So these factories are opened in poor communities that produces this material. But this program recently started with this fusion, went under the new secretary, and at this moment we're re-evaluating because we believe we need to do more. The proposal of this program is not just the production of sports material, but much more than that, the results that focused on the individual, social inclusion of this person, citizenship. So we have some pilot programs for supporting teams in connection to the World Cup, and also through some, we're discussing this and we'll start working on this in 2013. We also have games and events. It's games that are organized in the educational sports of university, which is not just focused on performance but on participation. These are under our umbrella as well. We're organizing the South American Games, which will happen in Natal, starting November 29th until the 3rd of December, with the participation of all countries from South America. And we're also discussing their organization of gymnastics, which will happen in Brasilia in 2013 in November. And for 2013, for the institutions that are interested, we're going to open a bid where we want to go not only the games that we foster for the universities, we also want to have to do a bid to foster educational games and sports for the society as a whole.
We also have recently created in our agency for the Segundo Tempo of Pelque, specifically for the Indian community. We've created a coordination for sports policies for Indian people to discuss and study these policies better so that we can propose affirmative actions and develop the sports for Indian people. So we have a proposal to grant more access to Brazilian Indians using the programs for this population, Brazilian programs for this population, because the logistics is difficult and the access to these proposals in these communities require a specialized service. That means that people from the communities need to work and be trained to work with them, so they need specific training for that. So this is being discussed, and in addition, a partnership for the High Performance Agency to work with some Indian talents and for athlete grants for the 2016 Olympic Games, as the Canadians did also. And just to let you know, this organization for these programs, we cannot forget to say that even though we've tried to expand our budget in the last 10 years since its creation, the budget has grown, especially for programs in the case for Pelque and Segundo Tempo, which are the greatest sports programs and social inclusion. But still our challenge is great, because we see that the great events, we see this as a great opportunity for us, but it's a paradox. It's at the same time, it's a great opportunity. In our agency at this time, our budget has been very much reduced for 2013 because the Olympic Games and the World Cup surely require more investment. So our challenge in that sense doesn't mean that we're losing money for the social programs, but we need to gain more resources from other sources and other governments and cities and state governments to invest in the great events. So our great challenge is to turn this into an opportunity so that these great events can actually be translated into a social legacy for our population. And it is our understanding, a legacy that we can actually leave, is our contribution is to expand access to the population so that they can have recreational activities and leisure activities. So the possibilities for us, due to the reduction in budgets and our difficulties in developing these policies, as I've said, due to the reach of these policies, even though we have advanced, it's still not enough. We understand the possibilities to articulate governmental policies and programs through intersectorial activities, such as what we've been doing, looking at facilitating access to the population to the physical and sports activities through citizenship and promoting improving life quality. That's why we are working here with SESC. Our understanding is that the revitalization of public spaces, it's not necessary to do great works for this. How many different spaces do we have available that could be used for that end? The government has been doing work in that sense with our congressmen, but our infrastructure budget is made up by legislation amendments. So there's not a lot to be done in terms of policies for infrastructure. This has been defined in the budget because of the way it's been done. So we're trying to raise awareness that is not necessary to construct or to build new spaces, so that we can invest in what already is there and improve it and make it accessible to the public. Train professionals and social agents also is important, and invest in the professionals in the networks and social agents. Develop researches and knowledge production to foster this proposal to the population. And I couldn't forget to say the network and articulating people and institutions, and especially governments, establishing a government pact between state, city, and the federal government. So this is a cooperative effort that has been proposed by MOVE, optimizing our resources and potentializing actions from the government and from the civil society. We have here some images from our program, the Painting Freedom. We're producing some material from the Segundo Tempo program, children doing several activities. From sports and leisure, that is intergenerational, from children to elderly people, the Indian policies. And that's what I had to say. So the name of our minister, the secretary, and thank you for your attention. We are at your disposal.
Thank you, Gianna. We will now hear from Vladimir Borkovic. I met Vladimir 9 years ago, if memory serves me correct. He's representing Streetfootballworld organization as a network director and chief operating officer.
It will be a different presentation. There will be no presentation. Because I think my colleagues and previous speakers gave you a good insight into the possibilities, how the world functions, both on the governmental level and also on the level of a foundation. I believe that I could give you a very personal insight into a world of a network, the Street Football World Network. And I always admired people that don't have presentations, but just free up and speak up freely. So let me try that today with you. It is a very interesting story that started for me 37 years ago, and since then I'm involved in football and social development. I needed to go to school to do that, to study and to receive a PhD in sports psychology. Now I have even to work for that. But it's a very interesting model of achieving something in life that then also support other developments. Some 10 years ago, with some dedicated colleagues who already had experience in social projects on the local level, we decided to found Streetfootballworld. It's one of the most difficult names to pronounce, so in Brazil we just call it Strici. In the other parts of the world they always write it differently, but we are used to it. We like to be small letters, long word, and different and difficult to describe. With Streetfootballworld we wanted to create a competence center in social development through football, because we knew that out there in the world of sports and also in the world of development, there are organizations, local organizations, non-governmental organizations, who deal with sport and especially football in order to achieve social change. The story began first with a long research period over 2 to 3 years. We were, let's say, searching the world and finding over 40 organizations that were at that point of technology reachable via internet or via phone and telefax. And decided in 2004 to initiate a creation of a network. Until today, I don't know if that was the best move, to have one organization searching for the others and then inviting them to found a network. And it is still an ongoing challenge that I will relate later on. After forming the network in 2004 with 8 so-called network members, we wanted to also raise more awareness about the possibilities of social change through football and through sport. Obviously, there are dedicated organizations to that. One of them is ISCA, with whom we collaborated since 2002. And there were many growing movements in order to achieve that understanding that sport is really a feasible tool for social development. I believe that my colleagues from Laureus and many of you have claimed already the field and the interest of all stakeholders of society, and I would not like to repeat how sport functions in the field of development. I would just like to echo the words of Tom saying that it's not a panacea, obviously, and that we need to work much more in order to prove its impact and effectiveness and efficiency. Still, a lot of stakeholders began believing in the work of the Street Football World Network and of our members. Obviously, they work very efficiently on the local level. We try to be their global voice. And as of 2007, we tried to formalize this network membership. We introduced statutes, bylaws. We went to an organizational level in order to be able to gain legitimacy for what we are standing, what we are speaking. And honestly, until now, we have not solved the issue of legitimacy. And there is often a question, okay, we on the local level, we have this social capital, but who are you to represent us? And do you do it in an appropriate way? Do you do it in a language, in a forum, in a context that is really appropriate to our context in Kenya, in Brazil, in Serbia? And that is one of the challenges that I wanted also to discuss with you today. The second challenge, and now this network is already 8 years old, is that we sometimes find ourselves in the situation of competition with our local partners, with our network members. So the often question is then, okay, do we go for that funding stream or not? Do we try to apply for the same funding that one European network member could apply from the European Commission or from the IDB in Latin America? And that's a question that is not easy to answer, because as an organization called Street Football World, you always try to sustain your work because you believe strongly in yourself that you are the agent of change. On the other hand, you have a real passion and belief that change comes from the local level, bottom to top, that we can change this world by working in the communities with the next and current generation. And that is kind of a bias that we are entering when we talk to every partner. And our partners try to understand it. We try to convince them to invest in both, but it's not always easy. The third challenge that we are occurring, and that's one of the most pressing ones, and that we would like to address in the upcoming at least 2 years, is the model of governance. So how is a network governed? And I do know that my colleagues from ISCA have a similar challenge over the last years. Who are we and who are them, and are we together in a decision or not? And who I am to stand for a network member here and talk about their work. That's why I'm choosing to talk about the challenges, not about their successes. It's their story. On the other hand, we do believe that a governance needs to have different stakeholders, and it's not only about them from the local level or us from the top level or all the others from the side who should make decisions, but it should be a kind of a balanced approach. In all honesty, it is not easy to find the balance in a world that is constantly changing. Today you have a partner like FIFA, and we have FIFA as a partner since 2007, that is adored in South Africa for its work, and in Africa in general. Then FIFA comes to Brazil and to the Latin American continent, and it's the most negative stakeholder that you can imagine. It is something that we need to cope within our partnership with the local organizations, within our own ethical standpoint, and it is something that is always a challenge when it comes to governance. The other governmental problem that we have as a network is that all our network members are very strongly locally dedicated to their work. They invest maybe 5%, some of them 2% of their time into networking and really have the time to think what it means to be a network member. What does it mean to come to a board meeting of a network board that we have established in 2008 and to be there really briefed, present, ready for making decisions? What does this mean for the whole management team that is representing them on different platforms? What does this mean for me when I come home and need to say, yes, as a board member, I decided that we drop a partnership because I thought it's not ethical, I thought it's not gaining success or gaining profit for us on the local level or on the global level. These kind of decisions are very tough to make by local organizations, and we have a very conflictive way of thinking about the future of the street football network. Conflicting in terms, we want to sustain it, we want it to be a network that will last long because we see many benefits of networking. On the other hand, we want to do that with the local agents of change, those network members, those colleagues and friends who are there not because of us, but because of their work, and we are, let's say, the governing body or the supporting body there because of them. And with this along comes also the question of representation, and I already touched that. It's the question, how do we make it possible that we hear also on these platforms the voice of local organizations? And I do know that my colleague, who will be the last speaker of this panel, will talk for a local organization. And I believe that this is also something that we should be listening very carefully. What are the challenges in the local context? I wanted to raise these few questions today with you, and I'm hoping that it will be an interactive session as it was proposed to be, so that you can also relate to me back with questions. Just one more personal reflection. When we started the work, and I said that we started really from zero, knowing that there are organizations out there, but even not knowing their contact details. It was the start of internet on a global mass level. I had the impression that we will be always running a network until I know all the names of the heads of the organizations, the names of their wives and their children. This time is fortunately over. We have close to 90 organizations, network members, new children are born. And that's also for me one of the situations when I believe that this network should come to a next level. And with this I would like to stop here, to thank you for your attention, and I'm really open for your questions and for your contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vladimir. Our next speaker, if you were looking in the program in earlier versions, you might have saw the name of a company, Unilever. But I'm one to think that the ones that are with you are the right ones. And the speaker we have today, Fernando Nascimento, is representing an organization that has had a 15-year partnership with Unilever. This is almost unheard of. One, corporate partnerships with our sector, with grassroots sports organizations, is still relatively new. And two, 15 years. That's quite some longevity and sustainability. And so we say, welcome to you, Luis, to share some insight to your cooperation.
Since invite was made to Unilever and we have a relationship of 15 years with Unilever, the focus would be a private initiative, but I'd just like to contextualize so we can understand how this partnership matured, and then we will show some other interesting points. So the Institute, as most institutions who work with sports, have human development as their main mission, using sport as the main means to work with children. The objectives, the goals, and our main goal is to make the practice of sports, give this opportunity with quality. Quality is very important to us. So this word quality is very important to us. It's a very small idea that you can, because it's a social project, you can do anything, but our focus is to give quality sports, especially to the underprivileged people of society. and we give preference to public schools and during the non-school hours. This institution was not connected to school. It had some things connected to school, but in the beginning, we understood that if we want social transformation, we need to be inside the schools. That is the environment that needs to be acknowledged as the main transformation environment, and sports needs to be part of this environment to help the transformation, and it's related to education. So to make this happen, one of the main points that we give our teachers is receiving. We saw that when you work with social projects, at first you have to receive the child well, they have to feel at ease and motivated. So make the student believe that he is capable, believe in himself, and get out of the idea that everything is difficult and impossible. That's one of the main points that we have in the Instituto Compartilhar, and that's something we work permanently with our teachers. All this has one main objective. The methodology is important, the quantity of material is important, but the most important thing, if you want to work on values with children, and I think the theme of the Congress is values, this thing is changing by itself. We need to make it that the child wants to return the next day. So that's very important to us from the project, which is to give the student the desire to return the next day. So it has to be something pleasant, educational, something that motivates and encourages, and that they can do. Because only if the student wants to return the next day, we will be able to work with values. And the sports values can contribute a lot to forming of citizenship values. You cannot work with values, and we've seen this in practice, with metrics. You cannot just work it with an index of 40 and 50 index of participation, but he needs to be permanently there so he can start incorporating the processes of values taught by the teacher. Not just talk about values, but we need to transmit these values consistently. So, Compartilhar in the methodology incorporated values at every moment of the class, not just at the beginning with a conversation or with a theme here or there. Values need to be seen by the students and the children. And we have four main values: cooperation, responsibility, respect, and autonomy. As these values are worked on as they grow. We work with children from 9 to 19 years old. So these have pedagogical principles, and the idea is that the child feels at ease and comfortable to grow with these values, and he will start experiencing this with the teacher during class. So what we hope, and that's a big goal, is to generate an impact of social change. And I'd like to share something here, something that I've said a lot from different debates I've been to, is that we need to break the concept that the sports has only the objective of occupying time. Oh, the child is too active. Go do some PE, spend your energy and come back. That's very weak. No, we're not a place for you to spend your energy. That's not the goal of PE. Yes, it does generate movement, but above that, it works values, and it's made to form people. So the objectives that we have, we want to promote health, values, quality of life, and activities to help in the education, development of the citizen. It's important. Sometimes people say, oh, do a sports initiative because he'll stop taking drugs. That's not always so clear. You can occupy time many ways, but you have to occupy your time in a useful way. So, yesterday we talked about this, and today too. Is sports good in itself? No. It depends how sports is used. And for it to be well used, you need to have a teacher that is ready, trained to deal with the processes and make the most of the 60 minutes that they have. Maybe you can't, 60 minutes is not enough, but you need to make the most of this, and the teacher needs to be ready. So within this context, the Compartilhar Institute is in a social sport project with 3,500 children from 9 to 15 years old in 4 projects in 5 states in 36 centers. So that's the context of our institute. We use a lot of volleyball because of Bernardinho, who is the president of the institute and created it. And we see some other sports due to the need. We don't have the expertise and the methodologies to work other sports, but the principles are easy to transfer to any sport. So an important point is the Unilever relationship. It's an institute. The project that used to be called Centro Rexona was created by Unilever. We received a main team, which was the Rexona team, and together we had a social project. That was just in Paraná. Over time, in '97, it was a total sponsorship relationship, visibility. With time, they saw that the social part gave them a return for social responsibility and also a way to approach the younger target audience with a different kind of advertisement. So it became an interesting thing, something interesting for them. And so this happened for 5 years, and we were encouraging Bernardinho to open an institute so that if Unilever were to leave, the project could continue. So he created an institute in 2005. The team moved to Rio, and the social project continued in Paraná, and the institute was open. And we started to evolve, and the project opened in other places of Brazil. And even though Unilever started with us, we did not want to depend on only one partner. So you can see there are many logos. These logos are companies that support us in each single center. We saw in our partners the need for them to see the return that the children were having. So our partners are usually local partners. So if we're talking about from Natal, I have 2 partners in Natal. And in Campinas, I have Medley, who is from Campinas. And in Rio, we also have Metro Rio for Rio. So we look for local partners so that he becomes more committed because he's closer to the program. And he's permanently going to the project and seeing what's happening. But obviously, that as the institute matured, Unilever also matured. For 7 years now, it became Unilever's global project. It's one of the only sports project that Unilever maintains in the whole world. For us, this is a commitment, a responsibility, but Unilever matured with us, and they realized that maintaining the sponsorship should not only be for the project, but at the institute level, also generate sustainability for the institute. Is not just for projects. So now they have some resources that go to the project and another part that go to the institute so they can manage the infrastructure. And that's not something normal. In all of our projects, we always separate an amount for the administration and the operational. the maintenance of a good institution makes it possible that the project happens. And many of our sponsors don't see this as a main focus. So this is an interesting concept that Unilever understood over time, and little by little, it took some resources from the project and passed it on to the institutional side. It's not something simple because sometimes the accountability is not direct. They have an audit with us, and in a certain way, we had to convince them that a continuous process is a process of trust, and they understand that. They're going to look at the data, and we're going to give them the data, but they cannot want to control everything. So this was something very important that I'd like to mention in relation to the relationship of private partners and nonprofit organizations. We also need to have relationships of trust that meets the needs of our partners. And it's something interesting is that the tendencies today gives us resources only from the law for incentives for sports. That's the problem we foresee. Most companies are migrating towards this. And the institutions are going to have to be ready to explain better and find ways to not depend just of public resources. Public resources are good, but they are extremely unreliable because sometimes they take a long time to get approved. So if you have a continuous project, it may be hard to maintain. So with this tendency, we have some challenges that we should question. The first is, how do you maintain continuous project if the preference if partners usually prefer to sponsor immediate projects? Second point, in relation to sustainability of the organizations, how are we going to maintain with good operational management if resources can only be used at the project in itself? How do I maintain a good working body if I can only spend inside the project? So that's another big challenge that people who have this kind of resources, some have the federal resources are a little bit harder to work with, but they all have their variables. Depending on partners that choose projects that have return on their brand, and sometimes these returns take 4 or 5 years to form a child that has values. We're not talking about changing the child, but the child incorporating values as a person is not easy. So what we hope is that our partners understand that visibility this could be an opportunity for the big event, but at the same time it's a threat because the partners, they go to the big events, and big events have quick return, is image return, and our return with children is not like that. It's a citizen return. He's gonna have a conscience of citizenship, and that's gonna take a while, but that's what we're after. So that's a very big challenge. And speaking specifically of the Ministry of Sports, through the law for incentivizing sports, is to have better balance from different manifestations, because the big events tend to steal the resources for construction infrastructure, and us as a social project geared towards children have a very hard time to convince partners that the sports, in educational sport and participation sport, is money that's going to generate much bigger transformation than just building a stadium. I'm not against building stadiums, but the stadium has a relation to infrastructure. Afterwards, we're going to need to use this structure so that it can justify the expense. So these are challenges due to these tendencies. My role here is to provoke this situation. The private partnership is very important for social projects, but they need to understand that social projects take a while to give results. Now we are measuring the impact of a project, and 5 years later we're doing the first impact evaluation. So it takes a long time. So thank you very much, and I'm open to any questions that you may have.
To quickly run through some of the values that were mentioned by the speakers, and I hope that you hear these in the context that these are what you can look for within your organization when you're looking to establish partnerships, looking to establish relations, and consider not only these values, but identifying what can be the values that you share with your work, with your organizations, with those that you want to cooperate with. Some of those values include social innovation, an evidence-based approach to your collective work, collaboration and knowledge sharing, the right to sport as a value, good governance, sustainability, quality, and the promotion of active or good citizenship. So these are just a few examples of the values that we heard from the speakers. And with that, I would like to then turn to some questions. I have one for Tom first. This is coming from Twitter. And the question is, how does Laureus prioritize the impact data that you're collecting? Yeah.
How do we prioritize the impact data? I think the biggest challenge for us, to be totally honest, before prioritizing the impact data is actually to collect impact data at all. So what we're trying to do is, it's a tough question to answer because there's so much data that comes in, but what I would say is there are sort of two big types of data. You've got the numbers, which there's a role for that. It's important. We do need to know how many young people we impact. And then you've got the outcomes type of impact data, so how their lives have changed. And I think, to be honest, in the past, we were definitely over-focused on the numbers. And we're now putting a lot more priority on the social outcomes and the life change. So we're very focused on that at the moment. It's a very, I'd say, a top priority for us. But we recognize that to get that kind of data, it's a really long-term approach. You can't just create it in 3 months or 6 months, maybe not even in a year. It's a multi-year program to try and work with our programs to get that kind of data. So I would say that's the data we prioritize. It's the data about how people's lives have changed over and above how many people we've impacted.
Thank you. We'll now go to a question from someone named Eliana. This is a question for Gianna. The question is, the non-governmental organizations, the NGOs, have been trying to supplement the shortfall left from the local government towards the democratization of sports. There is a financial problem, but mostly of management. In this context, why can the NGOs not apply for funds, and in parentheses it's PELC, in 2013, even though there are plenty of successful examples from previous years?
It's an interesting question that gives us the opportunity to value the initiatives of the nonprofit sector, as our colleague stated. He was talking about the incentive laws, that is a way of financing through the federal government. In other words, transferring voluntarily through partnerships. And I think what we were talking about, PST, Segundo Tempo, that is specifically for this program. Unfortunately, in 2012, we weren't able to open the financing or funding possibilities to the third sector. This is something that have been, for us, particularly myself, I've been working on this since 2006, and as we said as it's been said in this, we have excellent experiences. In some places, the government can't reach, like in some favelas in Rio de Janeiro, and in several other places, and not only because sometimes the state can't get there, but in fact what makes the institutions are the people. So it means that if it's a public or private non-profit organization, what makes a difference, those of us from the area, we know that the people that are in front of these institutions, we know, but unfortunately due to some complaints that most of you must have seen in the media, that started in February in 2011, and we saw during the whole year of 2011, and our minister unfortunately was brought down last year, and these were complaints and that he's been absolved of. These were unfounded, but this demonized, quote and unquote, demonize the third sector. We have good, bad, and horrible NGOs, as we do of other institutions, but unfortunately this whole movement from the media for the Segundo Tempo program made the Ministry of Sports to make a decision of not celebrating these partnerships with non-profit private organizations, and this was also done due to the decree signed by our president, the decree 592, that made all organizations, they scrutinized the accounts for organizations of the third sector, and unfortunately they made up of a list for the transparency portal, and they were considered not legal, not taking legal activities, and due to labor issues they weren't able to pay their bills, and they couldn't receive the second installment of these partnerships. But we have cases and other cases. So what we've been doing is to analyze each case and what was proved that were actually non-legal activities. This is going to be, the proper actions are going to be taken. But there are good experiences, and we hope to rescue these good experiences. And some of these NGOs that have already open lawsuits, and we hope that until the end of this year we are able to recover from this totally, and as of 2013 we can open new bidding opportunities, because we've been qualifying this process, and we hope to be able to regain these partnerships in 2013.
Thank you. I will now move to a question for Luis, if it's okay. Do you find any moral conflict from working with private companies? And there's a follow-up question. Do you have to consider carefully who you are working with, somehow linked to that?
Obviously, this is an ethical decision of the organization. This is a principle, but I don't see any problem working with the private sector. I think that the criteria need to be clearly laid down, and as I said during my initial presentation, we try to find local partners, and obviously we try local partners who identify with what we do, who believe in our cause, who have principles and values that are similar to ours. But I believe that working in a network is the great strength of it all. So when we go into a place, we use the public network with schools and teachers. The institution is a mobilizer, a catalyzer with the methodology, and we search private initiatives so that the public resources can be used where it needs to be used, so that the initiative, the private initiative, and the entities and organizations can carry out a project in a school. And with this, we can sustain ourselves during a lot longer. But there needs to be an ethical relationship and principal relationship between the organization and the company. What I sometimes feel when we started to establish very clearly what the criteria were is that the roles and responsibilities, if they're not well defined in the beginning, it is very difficult to sustain them later on. So it's necessary to establish very clear what is responsibility of the private sector and what is the responsibility of the public sector.
Thank you. Then you mentioned networking or networks. So with that connection, we go to Vladimir with a question on what factors do you need to balance when you're growing a network, and what aspects change? What aspects change the most, and how do you have to adapt your working practices?
Thank you for the question. We really started, as I mentioned, from ground zero, so to say. We had no network. There were obviously some regional networking aspects that happened, especially in Latin America and partly in Europe, when we started the research about a creation of a network. And as we were a young organization, we had barely funds, so we had not to deal with the expectation that we are a funding body. At the very beginning of our creation of the network, we also decided not to be a funding body, but rather a facilitating organization that supports the links between local organizations, NGOs, our network members, and different other stakeholders. So this kind of growth in our staff structure and organizational structure and the growth of the network led to one of the biggest risk factors that I also mentioned in my opening words. It means that you are always in a kind of a conflict of interest, because you would like to grow your own organization, so to say, but at the same time this organization is serving a network and more organizations. So at the end, one of the major factors, and I'm now relating directly to the question, is the size of the coordinating body and the size of the network. So if there is a balance, and I do believe that the balance should be a slimmer coordinating organization and obviously a bigger network, then you have a quite good opportunity to be understood also not as a competitor, but rather as a broker, as a facilitator. The other factor that is very important is, and I mentioned that at the end of my words, is to maintain a very personal relationship with your colleagues. Because if we start, and at some point we even had this challenge in communications and in marketing at our own organization, if we start with numbers and telling that we have so many network members and they serve so many children, or we support so many young participants, then it becomes quite blurry in a way. It becomes a bit chaotic and you do not know who is talking about what. So my suggestion, and that's the second factor, is to really be aware what you are communicating as a coordinating body and what are you allowing to be spread from the network members, because the experiences so far show that the strongest stories definitely come from network, and the self-celebration rather leads to a conflict of interests. And the third factor that I would like to mention is the right balance between the stakeholders, the partners that we are dealing with. Both as a coordinating body, as I mentioned, with the growth of the organization, you also need funds to sustain the structure. And then it really becomes a challenge to kind of find the right balance between those who are funding your work, the coordinating work, and those who are supporting the organizations on the grassroots level. And that balance, I believe, is also one of the most pressing ones for the future of the Street Football World Network, in order to see, okay, how can we achieve an efficient model of governance that is slim enough to not be a competitor on the local level, but on the other hand, strong enough to contain and continue the coordinating role. Thanks.
Thank you, Vladimir. We have time for one last question. But before we get to it, I will just say the way we take the questions, this is very interesting. So I have many more questions than we have time to ask, but I believe these questions are valuable. So as the moderator, it's my commitment to share all of these questions with all of the participants, with the panel today, also for their longer term consideration. As a closing question, it's for you, Luis. The question is, besides working with the children and teenagers, do you also have the families as partners to transmit the sport values?
I think this is the most difficult issue. We try to work in 3 different spheres. First, the project, second, the school, and third, with the family. And the family, unfortunately, is not a participating member or element of this community. So what we feel when we work with schools, the responsible parent cannot go into the school when they're having class, so he's not welcome at the school. And in many cases, when we call them to come in, mostly when you call a parent to the school, that's because something bad happened. So we've been trying to stimulate and to try to, the directors, the principals, to call in the parents and say, just to compliment, saying, oh, your son is doing very well, he's being he's cooperating, he's been improving his ability to focus in class and to show them these relationships. But this difficulty of being in the family, especially in some communities where you're not there, you're in the school and not in the community, is a great challenge. We're doing an impact assessment, we're carrying out an impact assessment, and we have to think about different strategies to motivate the focus group for those who are responsible for their students, and motivate the focus group who were not our students and were responsible for students in the school, which is the control group. And this is extremely difficult. If it's difficult for us for the activities that they're already in the project, you can imagine how difficult it is for those who are not part of the project. So the school, instead of being a school that calls upon parents not to reprimand but to compliment, this is our philosophy. Stop talking about what he's doing wrong and talk about what he's doing right. So I think this is important.
Thank you. In closing, I would say that the speakers here today, they're available after this session. You can find them, you can ask further questions to them, you're encouraged to network with them. Last but not least, I want to thank all of you, because you are the experts in your field, in your sectors, and we appreciate you joining the session and participating with your input. Thank you.